The Three Snake Leaves. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Jack. And Jack lived with his old mum in a wee cottage, just the two of them. But when Jack came to be a young man, he decided, it's time that I went out to see the world and seek my fortune. So Jack joined up to the army. And it turned out that that suited him very well. Jack was a good soldier and he sailed the seven seas and he was the hero in many battles and his courage was known far and wide. And eventually the king came to hear of this wonderful soldier and he invited Jack to come and visit his palace and honoured Jack with a dinner there. Now, as kings tend to do, this king had a very beautiful daughter, and she and Jack got on very well. And eventually Jack got up the courage to ask the king if he would mind if he asked for the princess's hand in marriage. And when Jack mentioned this to the king looked very serious for a minute and he said, Jack, look, I love her, she's my daughter, but I must tell you, she is a strange young woman. And look, just be careful, all right? Watch what you're getting into. But Jack was a young man in love, and the king's words just went in one ear and out the other. And he was so excited when he went and got down on one knee and proposed to the princess. And she said, yes, Jack, I'll marry you on one condition. If I die first, I want you to be buried with me. And Jack, well, he was so in love that he agreed to this condition. And the two of them were married. And Jack, he lived in the palace with his new bride and her father, the king, and he got used to living among the finer things in life, but it still felt a little strange to him. And Jack, being a prince now, well, he had a servant, he had a butler. But Jack saw the butler more like a friend than a servant, and he would tell the butler the things that went through his mind. Now, after a happy year or so of marriage, the princess was struck with a fever, and soon she was dead. And Jack, well, he remembered his promise to her. And when she was laid out in the royal tomb, he made his way down and he sat by where her body was laid out. And he had some bread and some wine, enough to keep him going for 3 days and 3 nights. And then he would die there with her. But as Jack sat there in the tomb watching over his bride's body, on the 3rd night, something strange happened. He saw slithering out from the cracks in the walls came a little green snake, and it slithered towards where the princess's body lay. And Jack said, no, while I live, you will not touch her. And he drew his sword and chop, chop, chop. He chopped 3 cuts in the snake's body, and it lay there on the ground in pieces. But then, out from the same crack in the walls came slithering another snake, and in its mouth it carried 3 green leaves. And the snake crawled to where its friend's body was and placed a leaf over each cut. And Jack was astonished to see the pieces come together and life breathed back into the dead snake. And the two of them, they slithered off away back into the darkness, but the leaves were there. And Jack, he picked up the leaves and he stared at them in wonder, and he looked at where his dead wife lay, and he went over and he placed a leaf on each of her eyes and a leaf over her mouth. And the colour returned to her cheeks and the breath returned to her chest. And she sat up and she embraced Jack, and she was delighted to be back in the world of the living. And the two of them came out of the tomb, and well, everyone cheered and was overjoyed at this miracle that had happened. And Jack never told a single soul, not even the princess, about how this had come to be. The only person he shared that secret with was his butler. And Jack kept hold of those 3 leaves. He kept them tucked in the inside pocket of his jacket. Now, the two of them tried to go back to their happy married life. But the princess had changed. She seemed colder and distant towards Jack. And after a while, Jack suggested to her that maybe what they needed was a change of scene. He said, "Come on, we'll go and visit my old mum. You've not met her yet, and honestly, I think she'll love you. She'll be so pleased to hear about everything that's happened. Why don't we get a boat and we'll go back to where I come from?" And the princess, she agreed, although she wasn't very enthusiastic. And the two of them went down to the harbour where they chartered a grand boat and they set sail, and Jack had brought his faithful butler along to go on the journey with them. And as the days at sea passed, Jack noticed that the princess was spending more and more time talking to the captain and sneaking off to his cabin every evening. And Jack realised that the two of them were falling in love. Now, one night, the princess and the captain, they decided to get rid of Jack once and for all. And they crept along to Jack's cabin while he was asleep, and they gently lifted him out of his bed and they took him to the edge of the boat. And they heaved him over the side into the sea. And before Jack knew where he was floundering in the cold, dark water. But the butler, he had been watching all this happen too, and he was paying attention, and he quickly rose and he crept to where the lifeboats were kept, and he unhooked one of the lifeboats and jumped down into the water, and he rowed out to where Jack's body lay and heaved Jack over the side. Now, Jack was cold and wet and he was drowned. But the butler, he remembered what Jack had said about the leaves, and he reached into Jack's jacket and he placed one leaf on each of Jack's eyes and another on his mouth. And Jack coughed up the seawater and he sat up, and him and the butler looked at each other and they thought, right, we need to get out of here. And they rowed and they rowed and they rowed back to shore. And they made their way cold and bedraggled back to the palace and explained the whole sorry story to the king. Now, a few days later, up to the palace came the princess and the captain of the boat. And she came in with a story of how they'd faced a terrible storm at sea, and oh, poor Jack, he had been washed overboard and there was nothing they could have done to save him. But helping her through her heartbreak had been this lovely, kind captain, and she just thought that maybe this would be her new husband. And the king said, "Is that so?" And then out of a corner of the room walked Jack alive and as right as rain. And the princess, her face went white to see him. And the king said that the punishment that her and the captain would face was that they would be banished to sail away in their boat and never come back to these shores again. But the king had had their boat knocked full of holes, so you would see how far they got in that. And then the king asked if Jack would stay and live in the palace and rule the kingdom, but by that point, Jack had had just about enough of the nonsense that comes with royalty. So him and the butler, they went off to live in the wee village where Jack had grown up. And from what I hear, they lived very happily after that.